I think we'll start. My name is Harald Hegstad. I'm the project leader of the project Baptism in Times of Change. I am sitting now in Oslo, in Norway. And I want to say just a few words before we start with today's program about the project. This project is part of a larger initiative, which is called Churches in Time of Change, which is an initiative by Nordic member churches in the Lutheran World Federation. Churches need to work together to face challenges in the modern and postmodern world, and that project is a sort of attempt to answer that challenge. And as part of that bigger framework, the Baptism project is a sort of a pilot project that starts with one pressing issue and see what we can do together. As we all know, baptism and the falling numbers of baptism has been an important challenge for the Nordic churches. And there has been a lot of processes on a national level in most of the Nordic churches. There has been some learnings across the borders, but not in a systematic way. It's just been rather limited. And it's our belief that churches can learn a lot from each other. We are similar, but we are still different, the churches in the Nordic region. And we can have common learnings. Both within the Nordic region, between the Nordic churches, and also globally. And that's when we do this in English, it's to bridge language borders, and it's also to invite an international audience to take part in what we are doing. I think there are a few Americans at least registered for today. They had to go up early, wake up early because of the time difference. But you are, if you are here, you are very welcome. This project is not a new research project. We're not producing original or new research. The project is about making existing research, existing experiences and resources available, making material accessible. We have done that through an extensive annotated bibliography, which is available at our webpage. So I urge you to visit the webpage churchesandtimeofchange.org and have a look at the bibliography. It's 50 pages bibliography with entries from all the Nordic countries on the subject of baptism, and it's an annotated bibliography. That means that there is a text in English which is giving an introduction to the content in each book or article, and that makes it accessible even if the book or article itself is in a language that you don't understand. So that's a way of doing things accessible. We're not just making the material accessible in this form. We also want to bring people together from the academic field, from research, and from the church, from church leadership, and from practitioners in the field. And when I see the list of you who have registered and showed up for this webinar, I see that we have succeeded in bringing a lot of people together, and I hope we will have a fruitful exchange during this webinar and during the following webinars. We have planned 5 webinars for this spring, and there will be more webinars planned later for the fall. So we hope that through conversations and sharing, we will also find new insights together for the churches to walk together and learn from each other and be up to the challenges of our time. That means that these webinars are important. The presentations will be important, but also conversations. And that's why we also have breakout groups, so that you will have the opportunity to talk in groups. We have organized those according to language. So some of you have, when you registered, you signed up for a certain language group. That means some groups will be rather national when it comes to the Norwegian, Finnish, Swedish, Danish, Icelandic group. Some groups will be more international, the English-speaking groups. That's also why we have chosen this format for the webinar, not just the presenters showing their face, but we are able to see each other. Just let me show you the schedule for the meeting or for the webinar. There will be now, when I have finished this introduction, we will have presentations, 3 presentations, 15 minutes each, a response, 5 minutes each, and then we will have a 20 minutes discussion in breakout groups, and I will introduce that later. And then there will be short comments from the researchers in the baptism project group, and that will also be an introduction to the researchers, so you will see their faces then. And then there will be a panel discussion by the presenters, and the audience may ask questions by using the chat function. So that's how we will do it today. Just remind you to make sure that the name that is shown in your picture is the name you used when you registered, and if not, please change it using the menu in the upper hand right corner in your picture. Well, let's move on to the presenters. We have 3 presenters that have all of them worked with statistics. That's the theme for today's webinar. What do we know? What can we learn from statistics regarding baptism? What is the status? And the first presenter is Josephine Ganebo Skantz, who is a researcher at the Department of Analysis and Research in the Central Church Office in the Church of Sweden. Please, Josephine, the word is yours.
Thank you. And just a wee correction, I'm an analyst, I'm not a researcher, but most of my co-workers are. So thank you for having me. Yes. Hello. As Harald says, my name is Josephine Ganebo Skantz. I'm an analyst with the Department of Research and Analysis at the Church of Sweden Central Church Office. And I'm going to start by giving a brief presentation on why I've been asked to talk today. And so I started working for the Central Church Office in 2018 after graduating with my MA from University of Aberdeen in sociology. And one of my first assignments was to work on this report that's in Swedish called Dopiförändring, or Changes in Baptism, together with my coworker, the researcher Andreas Sandberg, and Ingegerd Schilin, who's a church historian, and Andreas is a cultural geographer. So the numbers I'll be talking about is in part based on the Church of Sweden's own data. So we have the data that we get in based on social security numbers when children are baptized. And we've paired that in this project together with census data from the Swedish Bureau of Statistics that we purchased access to. And baptisms for the Church of Sweden are especially important because they are the basis of membership. So unless you're a member, unless you're baptized, you don't become a member. So even if both your parents are members, if the child isn't baptized, they don't become a member. And this changed in, I think, 2000. Correct me if I'm wrong. So my first slide is the Church of Sweden members after age 2017 and our prognosis of 2030. So as you see, we see a massive decline, but we felt that this project was especially important because this bump that we see around the age of 25, 30 is by numbers the largest groups of members in Sweden still, despite a lot of young people exiting the church the last couple of years. So if we miss this opportunity of collecting these, baptizing this generation's children, that's a lot. That's a big missed opportunity. And then we have baptized and non-baptized children in the church in Sweden, but baptized in Church of Sweden by year of date 2015 to 2016. And as you see, in 2010 we had the peak where equal amount of babies that were born were baptized that weren't baptized. And now that has surpassed. So we were at roughly 30% pre-corona, but it's steadily declining. And if we talk about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, 2020, and we had 30% fewer baptizements compared to 2019. So that's a quite steep decline. And we see two potential outcomes with this. Either these parents want to baptize their children as soon as possible after the pandemic. What will that look like? What challenges does that entail for our parishes? And the other alternative is, have we missed these 30% of these children? We'll have to see. But so I hope you keep in mind with the rest of the presentation that we've seen this very steep decline just this past year. It's also a sneak peek because we haven't released these numbers yet. So what we found in the project, me and Andreas, was, well, the decrease is, it's very clear why the decrease in both membership and baptisms are happening. They're decreasing because fewer people are baptizing their children. We also have more people leaving the church, which leads to fewer parents with a strong or at all an affiliation with the church, and therefore less inclined to baptize them. We did also see the factors because we sent out a survey to the general public asking if they had baptized their children and if not. And we saw that gender was a very strong factor. It is in Sweden, predominantly women who decide, or the deciding factor, or mothers, whether or not the child will be baptized. Church affiliation, if one or both parents, and then especially the mother, was baptized and especially confirmed. If both parents are confirmed, most likely the child will be baptized. Naturally, if neither parent is baptized, very few will baptize their children. But we also saw that, which has been seen in other studies as well, this connection between the lifelong relationship to the church through their own baptism, confirmation, and then the decision to baptize or not to baptize their own child. We saw that socioeconomical factors also played a role, though not church affiliation was the only one that was statistically significant. But socioeconomical factors such as income and education, especially the mothers, does play a role. And I'll show you some graphs, but higher income equals a higher likelihood of the child being baptized. And a mid-level high school education also is the highest possibility that the child will be baptized, while lower and higher education leads to a lower likelihood. We also saw geographical differences. In the middle part of Sweden, or among Stockholm, and the far most northern part, there's the lowest significance or possibility that a child will be baptized, while in areas where there is a stronger, more traditional culture surrounding baptism in the church, there's a higher likelihood of them being baptized. If we focus on this slide, because that's just Sweden's, you see that 63% of those with a mid-level income, a mid-level income will baptize their children, and 61 with a high income. So the most significant difference here is between the low-income households and the higher-income households. We also see that education, especially 3-year high school education, is what matters the most when it comes to the likelihood of baptizing your child education-wise. If you're wondering what the other side is, it's from the local example we had, so I'm not gonna, it's in the book, but I'm not gonna talk about it here. And then we looked at family constellation, and if you were cohabiting or married, there's the 60% chance of the child, or 60% of the children baptized. Sorry. Yeah, so the 60% of those, I'm terribly sorry. Yeah, so if a single person household is less likely to baptize their child compared to whether they're cohabitating or married. And in Sweden, it's not surprising that there's not that big a difference between the cohabitation and the marriage, because it's very common that you live together and don't get married in Sweden. So the second question that I was asked is, how has the Church of Sweden responded to this decline? And we've seen responses on 3 levels, and I'm not going to go too deep on it because it's not quite my area. But on a national level, there's the report that I spoke about. There's also been a development of communicative tools from our communications department that is made available to parishes. There's also the pastoral letter from the bishops, which you see on the picture here. On a regional level from the diocese, one clear example, there's obviously more of them, is Lund's diocese website about baptisms that's aimed at the parents of children looking to baptize. And on the local level, there's a number of initiatives such as letters being sent home with invitations to baptize your child to new parents. And in some smaller parishes, even calling new parents and inquiring, congratulating on the birth of the child, but also calling if they want to see if they want to baptize the child. So thank you for your time. So if you want to learn more about the report, the link is here. So the PowerPoint will be shared, so you can just follow it. And if you want to learn more about the unit of research and analysis, we do have a website in Swedish and a Facebook page in Swedish, where you can read about our other projects, but also more about this project. And yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Josephine. I can really recommend this report, which she mentioned, Dop I förändring. So for you who can read Swedish, it's absolutely worth using the time to. The Church of Sweden has done a really thorough job with this, which can be shared by others as well. If you cannot read Swedish, you can find something about it in the annotated bibliography and also at the webpage of the Church of Sweden. Now we move on to the next presenter, Bjarke Mortensen from Denmark, who is an information worker at Center for Pastoral Education and Research in Aarhus in Denmark. Please, Bjarke.
Yeah, sorry. Just a quick correction. I'm a sociologist. I will present my screen and I hope it has gone through. Harald, could you please nod if everything is in order? Great. Right, then I'll just leave my notes. They're there. Well, good day. My name is Bjarke Mortensen, and I work for the Folk Church Education Research Center, where I work with statistics and statistical analysis. My presentation today is called Baptism in Denmark, Past, Present, and an Estimated Future. It is so called because I will present data of how the baptism have evolved over time here in Denmark, and I'll also present a quick forecast about how it might develop in the future. Besides this, I will try to give a brief explanation of why, from a sociological perspective, why has things developed as they have, and I will give a quick look at how the corona crisis have affected Denmark, affected baptisms in Denmark. As you can see here, like the other churches in Scandinavia, Denmark, the Danish Folk Church has also seen a decline in the number of baptisms. Here I have data from 2005 to 2019, and as you can see, there has been a steady decline since 2005. On average, we see a slight decline of just under 1 percentage point each year. I have data that goes back to the 1990s, and it shows that the pattern of decline is the same, is broadly the same. However, the decline has accelerated in recent years, which means in the early 1990s the decline was a lot slower. When we see, I have forecasted how the number of baptisms will evolve in the future. We've used a statistical technique called exponential smoothing, which is a fancy way of saying that I have given the computer some data and asked it to show me how by the graph we see how might it continue in the future, and we can see the results here. This graph shows some of the prior data, and the forecast. I have split the two with the dots and the large number to show where the forecast begins and where the historical data is. As you can see, the forecast shows that
Bjarke, we only see your first slide. Can you
only see my first slide? Well, that's a bit of an issue. Well, then let's try this. Now you should see a new slide, right? Is there a new slide?
Yes, there are other slides, yes.
Great. It seems to be that I may have to swear my screen every time I present a new slide. So be it. Right. This is the forecast, and there are some of the historical data, so you haven't missed much. The forecast starts with the black dots, and everything after that you can see down the timeline. It goes on to 2028, and what we see here is that the forecast predicts that we will see a decline that pretty much matches what we have seen so far, and that will be a decline about 1 percentage point, so 1 times over. Forecasting, of course, is it's a mathematical guess, so we should always take it with a grain of salt. Now, when I was doing this, a thought occurred to me that maybe these children get baptized later in life. So what I did was I went in and I checked whether or not there is an increase in the amount of children from 1 to 15 who get baptized later in life, corresponding to the decline we have seen in the rate of baptized for babies. And I will now share a new screen, which hopefully will show the results of that. What you can see here is the standardization. I simply taken the total amount of people who was 1 to 15 years and hold it up against how many joined the church who are in the same age group. And as you can see, in a time where baptism has fallen, that was the prior graph, the amount of children who joined the church has not risen later in life. I have checked between different age groups in the age gap between 1 and 15, and there's no age group, for example, 1 to 5 or 12 to 15 that goes up in this time period. it pretty much matches what we see in this graph. So onto some explanations. There are, of course, there are, of course, statistical explanations, because one thing that affects the percentage of baptism is of course the immigration, because when we check to see how what percentage of the children who get baptized, that is affected by we take into account the total amount of people, which in a perspective is affected how many immigrants there are. However, it is not the total explanations. Immigration cannot alone explain why there are fewer baptism percentage. There's also something else that has an effect. And from a sociological perspective, studies have shown that one of the primary effects that decreases the incentive to have your child baptized is an individualization in religiosity. People want their child to make their own decision about what religious faith they should have. This corresponds to a development when you can see here, that I have shown here, where you can see that the belief in personal God and a belief in God in general is falling. So this whole idea that religion is going back, is holding on to the traditions, is kind of eroding, and instead there is this more individualized perspective on religion. However, there are also factors that hold on to religion as a part of tradition and something that one should do in one's life, and these are primarily cultures and local cultures that affirms the tradition that people have. We see this culture different places in life. So in this next slide, we see that this is baptism. This is how the percentage of baptism is shown across the country on the church entity that is called Prosti.
We see nothing at the moment.
We see nothing at the moment. Well, we'll do it live. I will skip the presentation and we will simply do it I will simply talk to you through it. What we see is that the west and the north of Jutland, Jutland in general, there is where we know there is a stronger Christian tradition. They have a higher percentage in baptism than in the rest of the country, specifically in the cities where there are a higher amount of immigrants, but also a higher amount of individualized people, individualized religious perspectives. So that concludes the sociological perspectives on what is going on. Tomorrow we will have more of this, because my good colleague Karen-Marie Sødle-Listen has done several studies where she has gone into depth about how this perspective affects the choice of baptism upon children or not. Finally, I would like to spend a quick time to talk about the Corona crisis, because like in Sweden, it has had a major impact on Denmark. I have a very pretty graph that I'm looking at that I cannot show you currently, but I can tell you that there's approximately 6,000 less baptized in 2020 than was in 2019, which is a quite substantial hit to the normal rate of children who get baptized. So in Denmark, we have raised this concern for my institution had raised this concern, because there might be we don't think it is guaranteed that these children necessarily will get baptized when the crisis is over. However, that remains to be seen, and we are following the situation very closely. So that concludes that. I hope some of it made sense, despite the fact that I did not have my slides as I wanted to.
Okay, thank you for a very interesting presentation. And I'm sorry that I have problems with the titles. I did not get it right with any of you, so I hope we will have more luck with the third one, who is Jarmo Kokkonen, who is the Director of Education and Family Affairs in the National Church Council in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland. Jarmo, please.
Okay, hello everybody, and nice to be here, and greetings from Finland. It's working, and can you see here now?
Yes.
And from the beginning, right now, some aspects of Lutheran baptism. Okay, and I have only 6 or 7 slides here, and I go straight to the topics. Can you see popularity of church ceremonies and so on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. First, I have an overlook of church ceremonies in Finland from the 1990s to 2020. And as we can see, in general, members of the church highly appreciate an option to have an ecclesiastical ceremony at turning points of their life. Even 4 out of 5 members mention this as a major reason to be a member of our church. However, despite appreciation in principle, the amount of church ceremonies is declining among church members. In comparison with other ceremonies, baptizing children has not experienced as steep decline in numbers, for example, in ecclesiastical marriages, but we can discern a downward curve also in case of baptism. However, ecclesiastical funerals have kept their significance in the Finnish culture as a whole. And this table shows also that the number of baptisms have gone rapidly down in recent years. Difference between percentages of baptized children in 1990, it was 91, and in 2000, it was 89, was almost non-existent, but something happened in 2010. The percentage of baptized children has declined 79%, and this negative development has continued. In 2019, only 62% of children were baptized, and today this number is under 60%. However, we can detect significant regional differences which are presented in this table. In the rural diocese of Oulu, Kuopio and Lapua, more than 70% of children were baptized in 2019, whereas in Helsinki diocese, the share of baptized children was only 40%. And in Espoo, it was 52.1%. So Helsinki and Espoo diocese are the capital area in the southern Finland. And in the middle, the yellow line in this table is showing the transition in diocese. And in capital area, the transition is the most impressive. Okay, this table shows significance of religious ceremony in connection with childbirth in different age groups by gender. Now we can see that there are quite many people who are not willing to have any kind of religious ceremony related to childbirth. And it is very significant that this attitude is most evident in the age group of 30s to 39 years, among those who are in the age of establishing a family. even 57% of men and 52% of women are in some way not willing to have a religious ceremony with the newborn baby. Thinking the whole population, it is something like 1/3 of all people in Finland who are seeing religious ceremony very important with newborn baby. And then this table provides information on positive decisions to baptize the child in families who have at least one child baptized. Reasons like I am a Christian believer is only 44%, and reason child will be God's child only 33%. Very important factor. The most important reason to baptize is tradition. Lovely tradition in general, or the family tradition, which means overall that quite many in Finland take baptism as granted. Okay, and on the other hand, reasons for negative decision baptism. 2 reasons are important. I do not belong to the church, and I wish that my child can make his or her own decision, as something like we heard before. One note is that this own decision of the child is quite popular reason not to baptize children in Finland. And as we can see, other factors are not so important. For example, economical reasons or reason that it is not possible to find godparents belonging to the church. And then this is the last one. Making the question when the decision to baptize the child or not to baptize is decided. This is very interesting question, and we have noticed that only 9% of families make this decision after birth. This empirical data reveals that many parents make their mind up well before the childbirth. More than 2 out of 5 make their decision even before they start relationship with the partner. We know that usually parishes send information to the families after birth. So one crucial thing in developing our work is that we should do something more and something deep with the young adults in the years before they have children at all. The question of baptism is the question of young adults and their relationship to the church. And this means that as a church, we have to carefully think again our youth work and find new ways in keeping up the connection, the fellowship with young people. And my last question for today is what happens in young adults' lives between 16 to 22 or 23 or 24 or 25, something like that, these crucial years, and how the church's message and church life is related in these years. I think this is the crucial question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jarmo. Now we will have a response from Steinunn Björnsdottir. Steinunn is part of the Nordic research group, and she is also a parish minister in Reykjavik. Please, Steinunn.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for insightful presentations. In my response, I'm going to focus on the situation in Iceland and look at declining numbers in light of other numbers regarding Þjóðkirkjan, the National Church of Iceland, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, as we call it usually, ELCI. Sadly, I do not have any numbers from 2020. It remains to be seen the effect of COVID on baptism. In all the 5 Nordic countries, the ratio of baptism per born infants has dropped, but the drop is nowhere as steep as it is in Iceland in the last 20 years. I'm now trying to share my screen. Let's see. As you can see there, in year 2000, we are close to 90% of all born infants, and now it is down to 42% of all born infants that are baptized in the Church of Iceland. So we were the highest of the Nordic countries, and now we are the second lowest. And that is actually in 2019. I don't know about COVID times. And I would like to note that in Iceland there are 3 relatively large Lutheran free churches that we do not have numbers from, and there's also a Roman Catholic church which we do not have numbers from either. So the number of baptism in general could be higher, but this is in our church. And the drop is clear, I think, regardless of what numbers we might add. For background information, it should be noted that all Icelandic children can be registered at birth in certain church or religious or lifestyle association, regardless of baptism. And this happens automatically if both parents belong to the same religious group and are officially registered there. And until 2012, here we have the numbers from 2005, and there is a steep drop here. This is after 2012. Before that, all children were automatically registered having the same affiliation as their mother. And after 2012, only children born to a couple that have the same religious affiliation are automatically registered, and others are registered elsewhere. I think all Nordic countries recognize this sort of public registration of a religious affiliation. It's a system that we have inherited from former times, and in Iceland we have heavily relied on it. But it is now changing, and it does bring new challenges. And I would now like to add something that might confuse some of you. Based on the automatic registration, children and people in general can thus be members of the ELCI without being baptized, and vice versa, because every year children are baptized, but their parents refrain from registration for various reasons. They might simply belong to another Christian church, or they might not want to commit the child to a religious affiliation, even though they want to baptize the child. It should be for the child to decide later. So if they're given the option, they will certainly start think about it and say, no, I'm not going to register. Still, the child is baptized. And why would they want to baptize the parents? One strong reason, of course, is tradition, especially the tradition of baptism as a name-giving ceremony in Iceland. This strong tradition is mirrored by the fact that the very verb to baptize, which in Icelandic is að skýra, is commonly used synonymously with the verb to name someone, to give name to something or someone. Included in numbers of baptism every year are, of course, numbers of teen and adults. And my Danish colleague here looked at it in Danish context. We think that increasing numbers of children are baptized later in relation to their confirmation. Every year, of course, there are also a few adults baptized. I don't have these numbers separate in numbers of baptism. They're not registered separately, neither at the registration office, nor have they been separately registered in the bishop's office, to my best knowledge. but we should definitely keep them in mind. What's interesting is looking at the numbers in relations to other numbers. If we look at the decline in members and the decline in number of baptism, we find a similarity. It does not mean that all children registered at birth are baptized. Correlation does not mean causality, but it would be interesting to do a further research here to see if parents that are both registered members of the church are more likely to have their child baptized. And I think, in light of the information that we have had and has been, for example, presented today from the other Nordic countries, there should be an indication, which would be interesting to follow up. Research on baptism here in Iceland has, however, been fairly limited, but the decline in numbers is clear, and I'm just going to show you again here. You can see the gray line is births in Iceland, and you can see the numbers in relations to that. We are slower to respond, or have been slower to respond than the other Nordic churches to this decline, both in terms of research and in terms of action. The ELCI is, however, responding now by looking at possibilities to link the baptism more to parishes in various ways and in renewing the liturgy. And the annual Pastoral Synod next month will discuss baptism and what to do. And of course, there is much to learn from other churches, which is why I'm particularly grateful for this webinar. So I hope we'll see further research in this area and further projects here in coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Steinunn. Can you unshare your screen?
Oh, sorry.
That's fine. Okay, thank you, all of you. We have no special presentation from Norway this time, so I would just add from a Norwegian perspective that the situation is quite similar. The last number of percentage of baptized children in proportion to newborn in the country is 52%, I think. So it's and it has been a decline. You will find more details on this on our webpage, and I just want to show you a chart. There is a short article there on the comparative data from the Nordic countries, and this chart shows this quite clearly. This is produced by the Research Institute of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Finland, I have to say. So I've not made it myself. But here we see the different countries, and you see the same tendency, even if there are differences. Some are starting higher, like Finland and Iceland on the top in 2000, almost 90%. Sweden on the bottom, a little above 70%, and Denmark and Norway somewhere in between. And then there is the same downward going tendency. So those starting high is higher in the end, even if they are lower than where they started. And those starting low is also now low. That means Finland was on the top and is on the top. Sweden was on the bottom and is on the bottom. But as Steinunn said, the most remarkable development, a sort of exception, is Iceland, which has had a steeper drop than the other churches. Started on the level of Finland and is now on the level of Sweden. And that, of course, is an interesting question for research also. What are the factors behind this sort of exception? It can, I mean, one can assume that and also research shows that the mechanisms between behind this development is somewhat similar in the different countries, even if there of course are differences. But I would recommend you to have a look on our webpage to find more data regarding numbers and so on from the different countries, and also comparatively, as shown in this chart. Okay, now we are moving to the next part of this webinar, and that is the group discussion. When you registered for a language, and Jonas, who is running the technical things in this webinar, he has divided you into language groups. Now we will have some short introductions to the responses of the churches, and that will be by the researchers members in the research group. You have already heard from Steinunn, so she will not say anything now, but we will hear from the other Nordic countries. That's just a very short introduction, 2 minutes, and you will also find this information about this on the webpage. But we will start with Karin Tillberg from Sweden. She is the researcher participating in this project from Sweden. She is working in the Central Church Office in Uppsala. Karin?
Yes, thank you, Harald. I don't think I need to add anything to that introduction. It's very interesting to look at the Swedish material in relation to these questions. Today we're speaking specifically on statistics, and in the annotated bibliography you will find information on books that have been written and articles, but also campaigns and various recruitment strategies and communication strategies. I think that is the main way of trying to address these issues, to turn it into a communication strategy. And we spoke in the breakout room as well about how to address these issues. And it's important to know that different parishes have different strategies which can be very beneficial, but it's difficult to see how that affects the general numbers for the entire country. But still, it's important to share knowledge and experience between parishes. For example, one parish that is addressed in the book that Josephine spoke about talks about a church governed preschool that proves to be an important arena to meet parents, but we also need to address the issue of baptism and baptizing your children with teenagers, in concern with what the numbers from Finland showed, for example, and that is not something that is shown in the material from Sweden up to this point. That the issue of baptizing a future child in the discussion with teenagers, that is not something that has been that visible in the material so far, but that might be an important question for the future.
Thank you. Next person I want to present is Jyri Kumulainen from Finland. He's a researcher in the Central Church Office, a research department in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland. Jyri, where are you? What happened?
I am here.
You are there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And so hello to everybody from Helsinki. And as I have been working together with my Nordic colleagues and thought about Nordic situation and reflected my position as a Finnish Lutheran, I find two differences from the starting point. Of course, we have the third one, which is that we have very different language to your languages. And in fact, we have bilingual church, so we have also Swedish-speaking diocese in our Finnish Lutheran church. But the difference, number one, is which will be in the tackled to some extent in the last session I will be chair of, is that we have also the Orthodox Church as our national church, even though it's very small, only 1% of Finnish people. It means that our church is also, as its name suggests, not Finnish church or church in Finland, but Evangelical Lutheran Church in Finland. And so I think this kind of a little bit pluralistic way of thinking, ecumenical way of thinking, is embedded in our church understanding, at least today. Maybe not 70 years ago, but today. And so we are, in that sense, having a dialogue partner which has a similar national position as we have. And the second difference, which may have some effect in our baptismal discussion, is that we have in our schools, maybe due to Orthodox influence, that kind of religious education, that we have religious education in German style, so to say, that we have our pupils studying religion according to their faith tradition. So it means that people, when they are baptizing their children, they probably are thinking already to some extent that if I'm baptizing my children to be a member of Lutheran Church, then he or she will have a Lutheran religious education at school. And there is that kind of discussion because there is also non-confessional religious or worldview education, life stance education. So this discussion regarding school is some way probably affecting our baptismal discussion, but we will not delve into that today. I'm just mentioning it, but to be honest, our trajectories are very similar to yours in spite of these little differences. And we have also been doing quite much thing. For example, we had a baptismal and sponsorship project in our church, which was getting quite much money from Synod. And so I think most parishes know today what kind of problems we have. And so that's some Finnish reflection from the research point. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri. Now to Denmark. Our researcher from Denmark is Jonas Adelin Jørgensen, who is also responsible for the technical aspects of this webinar. Jonas.
Yes, thank you. Yes. The picture in Denmark is quite similar to the one we see in other Nordic countries. In my very short report from Denmark, I will focus mainly on what will be the topic for the next webinar, and I hope that it will be a teaser for the next webinar in that sense, namely the empirical theology or qualitative approach to understanding baptism. And I believe that there has been a number of studies in the Danish context which are interesting in that regard. In the last 2 decades, as Bjarke has presented, there's a clear decline from 77% to 58% in 2018. And researchers agree that this should be seen as a longer historical development with a smaller percentage of newborns being baptized. If we look at the social and cultural and also theological processes supporting or discouraging baptism, researchers in the Danish context has identified a number of processes. First, the positive one, those supporting choice for baptism. Religious and cultural tradition, family tradition, and the ritual aesthetics support decision for baptism. People who find this important tend to baptize their children. Negative factors are urbanization, and some have tried to investigate whether age of parents and the migrant communities are negative factors, but they remain ambivalent factors. It might be hypothesized that secularization and pluralization and individualization are negative factors discouraging baptism. And I think we will look more into that in the next webinar. However, in the Danish context, there's an interesting feature when it comes to secularization. As you might recall from your secularization theory, the more educated and more wealthy part of the population are expected to be the more secular part as well. That seems not to be the case when it comes to baptism. The older and the more educated and the wealthier people are, the more they tend to baptize their children. So, and that might need some explanation. We'll look more into that next time in the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonas. I would add a few words from Norway. I think one might say that the Church of Norway initially went through a sort of period of denial when it came to the development in baptismal numbers. We saw that the number were dropping, but at the same time there was immigration and a growing number of people not with a Lutheran background. So the idea was that were those people who are not baptizing their children and not the church members. But I think that period of denial is over. We now see that it's not immigrants that are not baptizing their children in the Church of Norway, but it's also members of the Church of Norway. And as a reaction to that understanding, the baptism has been identified as a prioritized area in strategy documents and so on in the Church of Norway. It's at the moment one of 7 prioritized areas in the strategy document passed by the General Synod. There has been some investment in research. There has been conferences, meetings. There is a resource page on the Church of Norway webpage, and there has also been information campaigns in the congregations and also on the regional and national level in media, including even commercials in cinemas. There has also been a development of new practices. Drop-in baptism is a new phenomenon which is not limited to Norway, of course, but there is something is happening regarding how we practice baptism. And finally, there has also been going on theological reflection on this field, a process that was finished with a document by the bishops' meeting, the bishops' conference. They wrote a document, a theological document about the theology of baptism last year. It's called Livstegnet, sign of life. And in this period, we have also been revising the baptismal liturgy. So there is a lot of things going on. And of course, the question is, what were the effects of this, if any? It's hard to measure. And what do we do now? Do we continue working with this, or should we shift the focus to other aspects of church life? So that's also why this Nordic international conversation on this is very important. Well, let's move a little back to this. Is a broad picture. There's a lot of aspects in this, and we will return to some other aspects in the following webinars, including theology and new practices and so on. But I think we will now, for now, return to the question of statistics. And a question I would want to raise to the first presenters is regarding future. I mean, it's one thing, the easiest thing, even if that's not easy either, but it's easier to talk about the past than to talk about the future. But Bjarke had a very interesting chart where he had a sort of prediction of the future. And in his chart, there was a falling line. That baptismal numbers have been falling, and he predicts they will still be falling. And my question to also to the other presenters would be whether they have made any similar predictions. And the second question is, how should the churches react to this to the predictions? Is there any possibility of changing the outcome here, or is this just happening as a sort of fate? And if of course, if the line continues, we'll be at zero at some point in the future. So then we just disappear and sell the church buildings and and close the business. So how does the future like, and are we able to influence it? Josephine, would you comment on that?
My coworker, Steinunn, our statistician, actually made a prognosis that we didn't bring because it's not quite done. And if it continues the same way it has, we expect to have 0 children being baptized by 2030. So, yeah, I can see Karin's face. But we don't expect that to be the case because we think that at least people who are employed by the church will baptize their children. So it's not quite realistic that it's going to be an absolute 0. But if it's going to continue the way it has, our previous prognosis is where we've had best case scenario, probable scenario, and worst case scenario. We've always followed the worst case scenario in Sweden, and I think that's important to be aware of. And as for the future, my unit we're very careful not to tell people what to do, and I think it's what we can supply them with and have supplied them with is our parishes are reaching middle class and well-educated families, and they're reaching cohabiting and married households, families. They're not reaching lower income, lower education, single households. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And I think we can only supply them with that information, and then it's up to our diocese and parishes to make of that what they will and what they're more equipped to do, because they see reality and they meet these people and we don't, or I don't, and my coworkers at my unit don't. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Jarmo, do you have any comment on this future question?
I think one solution could be the question of language. So how we are talking about baptism, how we are talking about our Christian faith, so that that our language is can be in a way relevant for the people in everywhere, and how we can communicate the meaning of the baptism so that the people can understand what we are saying after all. And that's related to the question of secularization, as Jonas mentioned, that nowadays we know that people like to be spiritual without religion, without church, without any kind of systems in individual way. But also that question of secularization is maybe a question of language, and we should be much more brave in that sense.
Thank you. Bjarke, who had this chart of the future, to what extent can the church influence the development? Do you have a reflection on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I always caution people to be careful when predicting the future, because things unexpected things happen, like the corona crisis or stuff. So we shouldn't be too focused on what a mathematical formula can tell us about the future. Yeah, well, there's always the possibilities that things can change, and we shouldn't get bogged down too much in what has gone prior. I guess fundamentally my advice would be to accept there will be a decline of some sort in the future. It's almost inevitable as things look right now that there won't be. However, we don't know where the bottom line is. When is there a somewhere it will stop? Because it would be from my perspective, it would be kind of. I don't think it's realistic that the decline can just continue forever. There's probably at some point where it will stabilize, like so many other things in the world stabilizes after some time. But if I were to make one point, is that the decline of the church is not unique, at least in the Danish society. We have other kinds of declines in organization, for example, worker unions or parties, political parties. So one thing that I would mention to its version is it is a general problem that organization is eroding in the societies, and we can perhaps, not certainly, perhaps we can be inspired if others of the traditional organizations find solutions that they can grab onto. There might be some inspiration to get from other institutions in society.
So, but at some point this will plateau out, probably, you say. So we will.
Maybe, I have no idea, but I think it is reasonable that there will be some kind of plateau at some point.
Yeah.
But of course, I cannot guarantee anything. So.
No, sure. But then the churches maybe should accept that we will be on a lower level in the future and not dream about getting back to where we were 50 years ago. Karin has promised me to help me with the chat and possible questions there. Have we got any questions, Karin, that should be answered?
No, not yet, but I'm not sure people know that they can speak.
Yes, Jonas?
Yes, I have one question from one of the participants, Martin Rønkilde. He's asking whether there are some research showing a difference between parishes having engaged in campaigns for baptism and parishes not having engaged in campaigns. Do we know anything about that?
Any of the presenters who know anything about differences?
I could answer that, perhaps.
Yes, please.
We have, in Sweden, we have the data available to do that analysis, but we haven't done it because I think it hasn't struck us that we could. So, but that's very interesting. So for our case, I'll definitely bring it along and maybe see if I can make something of that, because that would be very interesting. So there's potential to do it.
I think that's a very interesting question, because it helps us answer this question whether anything helps. Is this just a development that goes one way independent of what we are doing, or does different practice, better practice from our side have some effects? And research into that would be interesting. Absolutely. Steinunn would comment.
Yeah, just on that note, I did wonder about this quite a lot this year when we were looking at the numbers, and we didn't see in any given place whether it had worked. But if you look at the whole picture, it could be one of the things to look at in reference to Iceland, because we had by far the least reaction. We haven't had programs to counteract this development. And we have also had the quickest decline. There might be other reasons, but it might be something to think about.
Yes, there was a message, maybe just to me, from Karin Sundmark. Has the bank crisis in Iceland in 2008 anything to do with the numbers going down so fast on Iceland?
It's an interesting question, because the bank crisis, we haven't necessarily seen a correlation between the bank crisis and the church. However, the bank crisis generated a lot of anger, and a lot of anger at institutions, and a lot of anger at, a lot of institutions in society from which you cannot sort of unsubscribe. You can't leave society at large. So when anything happened in the church, there was a very strong reaction to people leaving. And I think that may be, as a part of a general feeling in society. I think that definitely added to how quickly people, because we've also seen decline in general membership in the church, and it affected that. And so those things together, I think, might be affecting baptism.
Thank you. Other comments?
Yes, I could say a few. First, we have from Mortensen. As far as I see, there are two questions we need to address. If people are still Christians, why do they not let their children? Why won't they baptize their children, or why are they not going to be baptized themselves? The other question: if people have been alienated from Christianity, isn't it a question of mission? And I think that's a very that's also a relevant topic which will maybe be addressed more specifically in our future webinars.
I got a message here from Karin Sundmark. She says answers to Martin Rønnkilde's question from the Diocese of Lund. Maybe we should let you speak, Karin.
Okay, thank you. I've been working with the baptismal projects in the Diocese of Lund, which is the southern part of Sweden, and I've been working with those projects since 2007. And we finished the projects in 2015, but we still work on baptism in different ways. What we could see when we worked with our parishes, those that were in the project, when they were working really hard, they were not dipping that fast. That is what I can say overall. But there are so many factors. There are factors of staff changing positions, staff leaving, or very important people within the congregation leaving, that makes the work with baptism go down again, even though they were working very hard and made very good results. So there are many factors you have to look into, but time is what we saw was the most important, to work a lot and over a very long time, and don't let go. Thank you.
Others who have comments to this from the presenters, or I think we could allow others to ask, to say something as well. If there's a possibility to raise hand. If on the bottom when it says reactions, there's a button there, and if you raise the hand, we will see if we also could allow some of others here to speak. And the question that Karin commented on, whether we see changes when we do something, if there are changes. Are there anyone who has experiences in that field?
If not, I also have further questions from the chat. Shall I say those?
Yes, please.
There's a question from Sweden concerning this, the relationship between membership and baptism in Iceland, because we have in a way, we're polar opposites in Sweden and Iceland. And Eva Steinunn from Sweden is wondering what reasons do parents have for baptizing their children, but allowing them to wait to become members, given that baptism is not synonymous with becoming a member? What would be the reason to become members even when you're baptized? And I guess I address Steinunn for this.
Right, thank you. We discussed this actually in the Icelandic group here earlier. The reason that we have the current system of registration is something that we have inherited and we have relied upon. So current legislation says that membership is by registration, central registration, and baptism. Whereas because you were automatically registered, the baptism didn't sort of figure in as registering. And then what happened was that the central registration office said, we only want really the names. We don't care if the children are baptized. We're not going to keep those records anyway. Now there's a new legislation, and when that comes into being, it will mean that baptism should be the registration form as such. But there are still unclear lines about, how are we going to go about it and how are we going to keep this these records? Why would parents not make the child part of exactly this church? There are several reasons. Sometimes the child simply belongs to another church. This can be the Roman Catholic Church or one of the free churches or something. So they say, we're already members of a Christian church. We just want the child to be baptized here for any reason. Sometimes they feel that even baptizing the child is quite big, but they've decided to do it, but they don't want to commit the child to a religious organization, nevertheless, and they don't see that connection. And I should mention in this respect that in Iceland, more than half of baptisms probably takes place in homes. So they're not in church services. So they're not sort of physically there as part of the congregation. More than half of it probably in homes. I've been trying to, I'm working on getting the numbers. And then a huge part in private ceremonies. The home baptism dates centuries back because churches were very cold and far away, and children were very small. So we were allowed to have baptisms at home just to save their lives, basically. And it somehow is something that we also inherited. So it means that the link to the congregation is also weaker, possibly because of that. And that's one of the things that has been discussed here. How can we make it stronger? But so it means also that the baptism becomes quite private in a way. So I'm doing a baptism in my home. My child is baptized with all my family around, and it is actually a beautiful ceremony. And sometimes we have a house blessing as well. So it's a very Christian ceremony, but it's not in the church, not with the congregation.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect of individualization and baptism. I mean, in official church theology, we have a strong connection between the church and baptism. Baptism is the entry point to the fellowship of the church and so on, but people might understand it differently and choose it not because they want to become part of the church, but because they want something for themselves or for their child. And it's interesting, this connection to home baptisms, but that's quite a common practice in Finland as well, isn't it? Jiri or Jarmo, would you comment on that? Does that mean that baptism becomes an individual thing, or how is the connection to the church secured?
Yes, we have some kind of situation. Mostly the baptism ceremony is at home. In some cases, it could be in the church or church house or at the mess, but mainly it's organized at homes. Do you agree, Yuri?
Yes, yes. But on the other hand, if they are arranged at churches, it's still a private occasion. So it doesn't matter very much. I mean, it's not part of worship service. I have never seen any baptizing during worship service in my life, I think. Am I, or has anyone?
Unfortunately not.
But I think maybe somewhere outside Europe I have seen.
Yes, you should come to Norway and see. That's in Norway. That's the usual thing to have infant baptisms in ordinary church services, and I think in Sweden and Denmark as well. So that's a quite interesting difference. Rasmus, you want to say something? And do you have to unmute yourself?
Yeah, just to comment on the situation in Denmark, it's obviously it's like in Norway that we have most baptism in the Sunday service, even though we see quite a few services going on Saturdays, especially for more private baptismal services. But if we look upon it historically, we only have to go back to the 19th century, where a lot of people had their children baptized at homes. So in Denmark, we have seen a tradition going from private baptismal services in the homes to the churches. And I think the trend today in Denmark is that people will prefer baptism in the church rather back home. So I don't think it's probably it's not even related to that people are looking into their own spheres. I'm not too convinced if it's part of sort of the individualistic trend.
Okay, thank you. Karin, do we have more?
Yes. First, we have a few, and time is running out. The first one is on the home baptisms registered like regular baptisms in Iceland.
This was to me.
Yes.
Yes, we just take when we register it in the church records, we register simply where the baptism took place, and then this is also registered in the central data bank. And if the naming is done at the same time, we also send it to the central registry office.
Then thank you, Steinunn. And then Harald, we have 2 questions, comments, which are interesting to bear in mind for future webinars as well. From Henrik Bundgaard Nielsen, parents' approach to baptism has changed over time from a traditional thing to an individual project, which several have mentioned. And we have seen a decline in numbers of baptisms. But will it change in the future if people / parents will have a new kind of curiosity towards Christian praxis and message? That's really interesting. And also from Christian, I can't see the surname. Apparently there is a connection between social background, low income, and not choosing baptism. What are the church's response to that? I could just say something short from the Swedish perspective. This is something that is addressed in the book that has been mentioned as well, and it has been a debate, a sort of general class perspective on participation in churches' activities in general. I have not really seen that any solutions or answers have been reached, but at least it is a debate concerning it, and I think it's a very important one.
Thank you. There's a lot of interesting questions coming up here. I'm sorry we have reached the end point of our time, so we have to close now. I just want to ask you to share your comments with the project. We have an email address, contact@churchesintimesofchange.org, and we also urge you to visit the web page and have a look at the resources there. And we wish you heartily welcome back to the next webinar, which is in 2 weeks' time, in the 24th of March. So heartily welcome back. And I also want to thank heartily the presenters today for their contribution, and for everyone for showing up and for participating in this webinar. Thank you and have a nice day.